What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to The Haunted Beard. My name is Jake. Thank you for joining me today. I'm excited for today's video. One of the things I like to do sometimes on my channel is just give you a review and talk about just movies that I'm watching just throughout the week, of just stuff that I'm interested in and think is worth talking about. And so today's movie that I want to talk about is a film called Cure from 1997, and it was directed by Japanese filmmaker Kiyoshi Kurosawa. And this is something that I am still kind of processing and have been thinking about. I watched it just a couple days ago, and I haven't been able to get it out of my mind since. I've been thinking about it and processing it, and I've gone back and rewatched parts of it. And there is just a lot here to talk about and to digest. And so I want to talk about it today. I think this film is pretty special, and it is one that is lesser known and less talked about, but certainly I think worth watching and worth checking out. So with that being said, let's get into this thing. So Cure tells the story of a frustrated detective who deals with the case of several gruesome murders committed by people who have no recollection of what they've done. And now that is just a very simple and basic synopsis of this movie, because there is a whole lot more going on. But this movie is a kind of an amalgam of a lot of different things. I would say it is predominantly a psychological horror with a bit of a crime thriller, sort of detective murder mystery in a way as well. And so it's just got a lot going for it. And as I said, this movie is something that I'm still trying to process. But I want to get into it and just kind of start going through it. I'm going to give I guess a spoiler warning here, as I want to kind of talk about some of the details and the specific scenes within this film, because there's just so much to say that I really can't give my full thoughts without getting into spoilers. But if you don't want this thing spoiled, I'll just say this: go check this thing out. It is available right now. The only place I could find it was on the Criterion channel, so I was able to stream it. But yeah, go check this thing out. It is pretty great. But anyways, without further ado, here we go. So the first thing about this film that really stuck out to me was just simply how it was directed, and how Kurosawa sort of just presents us the scenes, and how he constructs the scenes in this movie is very different. And I just wrote in my notes as I was watching this, about 15 minutes into the movie, I said, I'm hooked. From the way he presents it and the way he directs it, it was just so engaging and fascinating to me. And so much of this movie plays so different than how you would expect kind of a typical sort of murder mystery, psychological type horror movie. And a lot of the scenes here are constructed where there's little editing. A lot of the scenes are shot in sort of these longer, extended takes with just these wide shots, and Kurosawa just kind of lets the actors kind of move around the frame and just sort of do their thing. And it's just really interesting, because there's an aspect of that type of presentation. It just adds so much to the realness and the authenticity. You almost kind of forget in a way that you're watching a movie. It almost sort of looks like you're just watching a stage play. And which I think is just a really fascinating and engaging way to present this type of movie. At least for myself, it really just kind of pulled me right into this thing. And so because you have these long extended takes, it just makes things feel so real. It feels like you're just kind of sitting there. You're sort of the extra party in the room, so to speak. And you're just sort of watching these events unfold. And I like, too, with just even the way he kind of composes the shots and in the scenes is, he'll have the actors kind of moving around in such a way that he does interesting things with the lighting. And so there'll be certain scenes where, like, a character will move back in the frame and they'll go and almost like disappear in complete shadow, while one of them's in the foreground perfectly lit. And then he'll switch it around. And so he does some interesting things just with the lighting and shadows. And then also, because of this type of presentation, it really creates this kind of dramatic effect when he cuts. Because oftentimes he will cut to something, a completely different scene, or he'll cut to like a close-up, or he'll cut to a reaction shot that really just kind of grabs your attention and adds so much kind of dramatic emphasis. And there's a scene early on in particular where these two characters are talking, and they're at this house, and they're kind of just having this normal conversation. And then one of the characters says something that is kind of creepy, that he would know this information. And as I said, the whole scene up to this point just plays out in one extended take. And after the character says something, then it cuts to the guy's reaction shot, and you see his reaction, and it's like us as the audience have the same reaction too, right? Because things just kind of took a dramatic shift, and now we've gone to from this sort of kind of pleasant, somewhat conversation to now things have just in an instant taken this really sort of creepy, eerie turn. And so there's just so much emphasis, and so just the editing of when he chooses to cut that is just so effective and memorable. The way he shoots the kills and the death scenes in this movie is in a very similar way, and it makes them really just stand out. So rarely do we see kills in horror movies, or really in any kind of movie, just presented so simply and matter of fact. There's a scene in the movie where a police officer, two police officers, are standing outside of a police station, and they're just kind of going about their business, whatever, and one of them, just for no apparent reason, just pulls out his gun and shoots the other guy right in the back. And it's just presented in this one shot, wide shot, and it's just like the guy just does it as if he's doing any other just sort of menial task. And it just gives this thing just such a very sort of weird and off-putting and kind of disturbing vibe. And just it just feels so real. Like if you were standing there, like that's how you would see this. There's no like quick cut or close-up or anything like that. And so because of its kind of simple sort of matter-of-fact presentation, it really kind of makes this thing stand out. So our main character is Detective Takabe. And he is investigating this case and trying to piece together how all of these murder victims have something similar in common. They all have this X mark either on their neck or on their chest when they're found. But the killers have all been different people, and they have like no recollection of what they've done. And so how is there this sort of this connecting line between all these killers, even though they're all different, but all these victims have the same mark on them? And he's a guy whose character is very complex, and a lot of it is kind of presented subtly, but I think this is a great film that I think will reward multiple viewings, because I think there's a lot of details that are easy to kind of overlook and miss on a first watch. But he's somebody who is kind of just really dealing with a lot of internal conflict, and obviously he wants to find this killer, and so he's just really stressed out over all that. He's also got a wife at home who is dealing with a lot of mental health problems, and so he's dealing with that as well. And so there's just a lot going on that he's just really kind of wrestling with and dealing with, and he makes for just a really compelling main protagonist. And early on in the movie, we are introduced to this character. We don't know who he is yet. We find out later on his name is Mamiya, and he is the one who is behind all these killings. And the film does something interesting that isn't really kind of the traditional route that sort of a murder mystery type movie would take, is that it's not a typical kind of whodunit. It doesn't lead to the ultimate climax to where you find out who the killer is. You know who the killer is, and the detectives find out who it is about halfway through the movie. They capture this guy. And so it more becomes about who is his character specifically, because he is this very just mysterious and enigmatic and creepy character. And so you want to figure out who is this guy, and what is he up to, and why is he doing what he is doing. So as you learn throughout watching the movie, that Mamiya is using this form of hypnosis to hypnotize these people into killing other people. And he's such an unnerving character and killer. And one of the reasons is that he is, at least he claims to be, suffering from amnesia. He doesn't know who he is or really remember anything. And so every sort of interrogation or interview that the detective or anybody else does with him, is any sort of question they ask him is really only met with further questions. And he's just this kind of mysterious puzzle. But one of the things that he continually says that shows up repeatedly throughout the film is he asks the detective and other people, "Who are you?" and he asks it many, many times. And I think it's that question that kind of gets into a little bit of what's going on kind of underneath the surface in this movie. And this is part of what makes Cure so interesting, is that there is more than what meets the eye. There's more going on in this film than what is just simply presented at a surface level. And every time Mamiya asks somebody that question, who are you, he's always met with a similar response. They answer by giving their name or their job position or what they do. But that's not really what he's after. And he continually asks this question. And so I think there are themes of identity that are kind of woven into this movie that I'm going to get into a little bit more later on in this video. But before I do that, I have to talk about what I think is one of the highlight scenes in this movie. And it's after Takabe finally discovers Mamiya's apartment, and he kind of starts to uncover some of the background and the details as to who he is. And Takabe is getting ready to leave, and all of a sudden we're treated to this like fast montage of these quickly cut images. And it really is kind of jarring and throws us off because the vast majority of this movie is just kind of slow paced. There's not a bunch of like rapid fire edits and stuff like that. So it really kind of grabs our attention, and it gets him to go back to his house. And he goes back to his house, he opens the door, walks in, and he sees his wife hanging in their house. And it is this unexpected surprise, this horrific discovery. And I just love how sort of simply and straightforward Kurosawa presents it, because I feel like the vast majority of horror movies, if you're giving us this sort of scenery, it's going to be met with some sort of either intense dramatic music or certainly some sort of jump scare effect, right, where you get this blast of sound. But Kurosawa just lets the images speak for themselves and doesn't add any sort of artificial music or anything to it. And it is just shocking and horrifying. And then we see Takabe's reaction, which is equally as just disturbing and really just sad and awful. And then after that, though, it cuts to him kneeling on the floor, and his wife is right there, leaning over him, asking him if everything is okay. And it really just kind of throws this whole thing up on its head, because now we're questioning Takabe's mental state. We're questioning, has he been now put under hypnosis? Is he now been, sort of mentally compromised? And it just really kind of throws a wrench in this whole thing that I just found just really interesting, and I just thought it was just a great choice, and it just kind of adds, again, just so much more mystery to this already mysterious movie. Now, when I got to the end of the movie, I had just this really sort of perplexed feeling, and I felt like I had seen something special and unique and maybe even profound in a way, but I couldn't fully explain why, and I didn't fully understand it. And so I've spent some time over the last couple of days really kind of reflecting and processing this movie and going back and rewatching some scenes, and I think it is, at least I've got some sort of a conclusion or some sort of understanding, at least what it means to me, but I think this is a pretty rewarding film for those who are willing to kind of dig in and kind of investigate what this movie is trying to say. And so I kind of want to get into that to wrap up this review. But I think, as I said, this movie has something to do with identity and that question of who are you? So later on in the movie, there's a scene between Takabe and his sort of partner, a psychologist, where the psychologist shows him this video, this old video of this woman being hypnotized. And ultimately that hypnotizing leads her to killing her son. And I think based on that scene and the conversation the characters have, the film is kind of suggesting that there is something more to Mamiya's character beyond just him as a human being. Almost as if he is this sort of supernatural entity, sort of this evil entity, maybe even evil itself or even the devil. And so when you kind of look at his character that way, it kind of changes things a little bit. And bringing back to, again, that central question of who are you, he's asking that question from a more kind of deeper perspective. And like, one of the things that I noticed throughout this movie is that almost all of the characters are either killed or they themselves kill. And so when you look at that question sort of reflected on, I guess, humanity in general and what it says about us, and it's like we are killers. We either kill or be killed, and it kind of goes back to this survival of the fittest, human nature, kill or be killed kind of thing. And what makes that even more fascinating is earlier on in the movie, another scene between Takabe and the psychologist. Takabe is asking him questions about how people could, turn into murderers through hypnosis, and he says, "Well, being under hypnosis isn't going to change your sort of moral convictions. In other words, you're not going to become a killer if you think killing is wrong just because of hypnosis." Well, what does that say about the characters in the movie who were able to be hypnotized into becoming killers? Who is really at fault for the murders? Is it Mamiya, or is Mamiya just simply exposing who these people are, their identities? And I just think that that is fascinating. It's certainly a very dark and bleak kind of take and interpretation on human nature, but I think it tells it in a very interesting and fascinating way. I also can't help but think of the title of the movie, Cure, and just simply asking, what is the cure to all this? Is there one? Well, the film doesn't really provide us with a solution or an answer to it, which I think is even more sort of bleak and dark, because is there a cure? I don't think that there probably is. At least certainly the film doesn't think that there is. And so just another kind of interesting thing there. And then ultimately it leads to just the last few minutes, which I think this movie is one of the most horrific and disturbing endings that I've seen in quite some time. And I can't help but be reminded of the film Seven, which is often kind of quoted or talked about as being a very disturbing, messed up ending. And I think this movie has some similarities to that. However, it just doesn't, it tells it in a more kind of reserved and subtle way. But the implications of it, I think, are just as disturbing, if not more so. And so what ends up happening is Takabe checks his wife into a healthcare facility so he can, finish the investigation. And so there's a scene at the very end of the movie where Takabe meets Mamiya, who has escaped from his holding facility, at this sort of broken down, dilapidated building. And Mamiya tells him this is where one would come to discover his true self. And we feel like we're finally going to kind of get an answer to that who are you type question. That Mamiya is going to tell Takabe who he really is, who Takabe really is. And Takabe shoots him and kills him. And I think that's really interesting too, because it's like Takabe's finally getting ready to be confronted with the truth of who he is, but he isn't prepared to hear the answer. He isn't prepared to hear the truth of who he really is. And right before Mamiya dies, he does the little X symbol, which, connecting back to the video that we see earlier in the movie, I think sort of shows that that was him in that video. Thereby, he is this, who knows how old of this, sort of evil entity kind of thing. And then we can only assume based on that Takabe has now been hypnotized. Then we get a scene, a quick shot, like 2 seconds, where we see that Takabe's wife has been killed and she's in the facility. She's got the X mark and she's dead, which is just horrific because that means she could have only been killed by Takabe. And again, if the hypnosis rules are true, that it doesn't actually change his moral sense, what does that say about Takabe and his feelings about his wife? Did he desire to kill her this entire time? I mean, just what a horrifically disturbing thought. And then it ends with him sitting in a little cafe restaurant. And I just love the final shot, just kind of it's almost like a blink and you'll miss it moment where you see one of the waitresses just simply grab a knife as if she's about to go kill somebody and just kind of continue this whole cycle all over again. And then the film cuts to credits. And it's just like what in the world did I just see? Look, this movie is fascinating to me. There is, I think, a lot more there than I was even able to get into, and I'm looking forward to revisiting this thing. But I think it's really rewarding. It's one that I think kind of takes some digging and takes some investigating into. But man, I really got a lot out of this. This is a fascinating movie. It's a perplexing movie, and it's a hypnotic movie in a lot of ways too, just in the way that it's shot. But man, I really had a good time with this, and so I would highly recommend you check it out if you're interested in something a little bit different. Those are my thoughts on Cure. Hit me up down in the comments, though, if you've seen this thing. Let me know kind of your interpretation of things. And I know that there's just a lot there to kind of dig into, but I would love to hear from you. Let me know. Thank you again so much for watching. I greatly do appreciate it. If you like content like this, hit that subscribe button. This is what I do on The Haunted Beard. It is all horror and thriller movie content coming at you. And I'll see you next time on The Haunted Beard.